So I want to move on to our next session, which is another deep dive session. And this is this is Dr. Jon Chamberlain from University of Essex. He's a senior lecturer in computer science and electronic engineering. He's also the director of the Marine Technology Research Unit. And he's going to talk a little bit about some work that they're doing around the human impact on the Norfolk's chalk reef using something called photogrammetry. And I've seen some of this being used in the mining industry to look at volumes of earth being moved and such. I'm really looking forward to this next session a great deal. So on that note, Dr. Chamberlain, I'll hand over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Jon Chamberlain. I'm a senior lecturer from the University of Essex, and I'm also a director of the Marine Technology Research Unit there. I'd like to talk to you today about some of the collaborative work that we've done with Natural England in looking at the human impacts on Norfolk's chalk reef using 3D photogrammetry, and you can see an example in the slide here. I'll be on the call, so you can ask me questions using the Engage tab as we go along, so don't wait till the end. If you didn't know already, there's an ecologically significant area of exposed and elevated chalk reef off the north coast of Norfolk. It runs about 20 miles long from Weybourne in the west through to Haysborough in the east. And you can see here a map of the marine conservation zone that was where it was designated in 2016. Now, this chalk was deposited in the late Cretaceous period, and over time it's eroded away and provides a perfect habitat for many marine creatures, including crabs and lobsters. And these crabs and lobsters are caught in the fishery around the North Norfolk coast, which is worth about £2.4 million per year. However, evidence from citizen science divers indicated that human activities were damaging the reef, and this was sent through to Natural England in 2018. So Natural England were considering recategorising chalk reefs at risk from human impacts, but needed to find more evidence. Natural England are the non-departmental public body in the UK responsible for ensuring that England's natural environment is protected and improved. And they wanted to run a rapid and impartial investigation into human activities and human impacts on the chalk reef. So they got in contact with me at the University of Essex at the Marine Technology Research Unit, because we had been doing rapid marine surveying on tropical reefs using 3D reconstructions. And we worked together to adapt that methodology that we'd been using on tropical reefs to make it suitable for UK surveying. And actually the environments that we're surveying, in some ways they're quite similar, but actually they're also quite different. So in this project we wanted to survey the rock formation rather than the coral structures. In addition, the sea itself, the conditions that we're working in are quite different. So the North Sea can be quite turbid. It's certainly much colder, and there is often more tidal range and exposure to deal with as well. And finally, when you're diving for work in the UK, you have to adhere to HSE regulations, which makes everything a little bit more complicated and certainly more expensive, as you have to put together a bigger dive team. This is an example of a 3D model of what we usually capture when we are doing tropical surveying. And this is captured using a single GoPro camera that systematically is moved across this area. And this area is about 2 meters squared. We capture approximately 80 images over the quadrat, and then we process it using a bit of software called Photoscan or Metashape, and this produces the 3D model. And you can see here that you can get a very good idea of the kind of corals and animals that are living in this very small patch of reef. This is how the photogrammetry works. Underneath these blue squares you can see the model that we just looked at, and you can see the tape measure going around bounding the box of the 2 meters squared. And you move the camera systematically over the top to create good overlap between the images that you're capturing. And the overlap should be approximately 60% between each image. This process, when you put those images together, is called structure from motion, and it's the process we use for reconstructing the marine environment into a digital environment, creating a digital twin, if you like, of the environment that we're interested in. You can do this using photographs, or you can also extract frames from videos, which is another good method to do this by. Once you have a 3D model, a 3D environment, you can then analyze that in different ways. So, for example, you can analyze the volume of the different types of rocks and benthic fauna that you have in the model. You can look at the color it is, and that's particularly useful if you're looking at coral bleaching in the tropics. And perhaps most importantly, you can look at complexity. Now, complexity is important because when you think about the kind of animals that live within these environments, the small ones like to hide in, the small hidey holes. The bigger ones will use bigger parts, bigger rocks to hide around, and it stops them being eaten by the other fish. So it gives them a home and a habitat to live in. Complexity is usually measured in situ by divers with something called rugosity, and that's where you drape a chain over the top of the reef and you see how far it has travelled against its known length. And that shows you how bumpy it is, how rugose it is. There are two other computational methods for analysing complexity that can only be done with a three-dimensional model, and that's vector dispersion and fractal dimension. And we worked with Natural England to survey Norfolk's chalk reef, and we were looking for indications of impact due to human activity. And the majority of human activity in the areas we were looking at is actually traditional pot fishing. And here you can see a traditional double chamber parlour pot that is used off the coast of Norfolk. Now, these things are quite heavy. They're made from steel with nylon rope wrapped around the outside, and they have typically one or two entrances. And you can actually see here there's a lobster in this pot as well. Now, when this pot lands and it settles, it moves about in the tide a little bit, but generally speaking, this is a very well settled pot. But even so, you can see that there's an area where we're looking at now that has been abraded, and there's exposed chalk, and exposed chalk is very white, unlike the chalk around it that's kind of grey and got dusty and got overgrowth on it. Exposed chalk is very, very bright white. So we wanted to look at these areas where the pots were, and also areas around them, to act as control points, and also to categorise any types of damage that we found. Crab and lobster fishing in Norfolk follows this configuration. They have two surface marker buoys at the end of a approximately 200 metre long rope, which is called a shank. There's two anchors on either end, and there's usually about 10 pots along the shank. So in order to capture the data quickly, we dropped down on one of these buoys, swam along the length of the shank, surveying as we went, and then came up on the buoy at the other side. And this is the device that we used, that was developed at the University of Essex, and we've used it for numerous applications. It's actually made from plumbing pipe and cable ties, as all of the best prototypes are. But it's a handheld device that has 6 cameras on, 5 around in a ring, and 1 in the centre. And the 5 on the outside are actually angled outwards slightly, as you can see in the image. And this is very well suited to structure from motion. It captures images on an angle, so you get better reconstruction of overhangs. It's very simple and very simple to operate, very easy to teach people how to use it, and there's a very low cognitive load for the diver team. And that's very important, because when you're doing HSE diving, you have many things to keep track of, such as the normal diving things, such as time and depth and air, but also you have underwater comms and managing SMBs and these kind of things. So it's important to have a very simple device to use. And once we capture those images, we bring it back to the lab and we can reconstruct three-dimensional models of the marine environments. And you can see on the left, this is the three-dimensional model that we've created of one of the pots sitting in a chalk gully. And we can then use that three-dimensional model to create measures of complexity. Now, the first one that we do that replaces the traditional in situ measurement is the measure of rugosity. And we lay 6 lines across the model, as you can see in this middle image, and we slice the model down along those lines. And here on the right hand side you can see those slice marks. And so we can measure the distance of those slices, and that gives us our measure of rugosity. Vector dispersion and fractal dimension are ways of looking at the construction of the model itself and looking at the angles of the polygons that it's made up from. And that's something that can't be done in any other way than having a digital model. We identified 11 types of damage on the reef, and some can only have been attributed to human activity, and some of course were more common than others. And this is a unique output of this research that combined the experience of the dive team and the people at Essex as well, because the elevated areas of chalk and the gullies are quite unusual in terms of habitat and structure in the UK. The results of the survey showed that the chalk bed was indeed showing signs of human attributable damage. And it was actually the ropes that caused more severe damage than the pots and anchors, because the shank lies across these gullies, and the pots actually pull the rope down onto the chalk. So as the ropes get moved about, it acts like a cheese grater and cuts into the chalk and slices large amounts of chalk off from the seabed. We actually found in the study that the areas that we were investigating, the quadrats we were using, were not big enough to capture the elevation of the gullies, as you can see here in this pot. So we actually need to do further study on that, and that is underway. The outcome of the investigation was a report by Natural England and the University of Essex that was published at the end of last year. And along with the results I've just briefly shared was also the development of the method for UK surveying using photogrammetry. And it was collaborative research, but it was a collaborative report as well. The report was delivered to the Eastern IFCA, who have responsibility for managing policy around the reef, and they have implemented an adaptive risk management approach for this Chroma Shoal MCZ to minimise chalk damage. All of the models that we created during this project are available through my Sketchfab account, sketchfab.com/Jon Chamberlain. The collaborative project has led to more action that's going to happen this year, and some of it involves the University of Essex, and other involves collaborations between other stakeholders. So legislation and policy change, which is led by the Eastern IFCA and Natural England, in collaboration with the fishers, will be ongoing this year, and part of that is to use annual permits and pot labelling to identify who is fishing and with what, so that we can start adjusting fishing practices. Sea Search and local divers are working to actually expand the monitoring of the area and to use this 3D approach, and also to work with fishers to recover lost fishing gear, because this is one of the most damaging types of activity that's happening from humans. I'd just like to speak a little bit about why the collaboration worked between Natural England and the University of Essex. The previous collaborations that we've had together with the partners that put the project together allowed a high degree of trust, and I think things like seed corn funds and impact acceleration events and network outreach events, where you have a small amount of money and partners work together on a small objective, are a great way to build that trust. Through these previous collaborations, both of the partners understood what we were bringing to the project, and we knew what expertise that we had on the team, but also we knew where we needed to bring in extra help. So particularly with the dive team, we needed extra help from HSE divers to help us there. It's very important to know where to find funding. That's probably one of the key things that unlocks a lot of the work that we have done. And both Natural England and the University of Essex provided funding to make this project happen. I think perhaps the most important thing is to really understand the nature of the problem that you're working on between all the stakeholders and to have a shared outcome. And in our case, our goal was to make the fishery more sustainable and to protect the marine environment. The project in 2020 actually received a couple of awards from the University of Essex for Best Research Impact, and also an award from DEFRA as well. Because of the project, we actually have further collaborations that are going on this year that involve the University of Essex. We're working with CSearch to expand the data collection using citizen science divers, and you can see such a diver here. And they carry their usual equipment. Perhaps they take an extra slate with them, and they just record observations for us. We're also involved in education and outreach, talking about the project in schools and with fishers, with Norfolk Council and the Eastern IFCA. And we're also working with CFAS about using this approach to help them analyse opportunistic ROV data that they have been collecting in deeper parts of the North Sea. And the Marine Technology Research Unit at Essex, we have lots of interesting research going on, and one of the things we're doing is to adapt this approach of multi-camera surveying to make it deeper using an ROV, which you can see our DTG3 here in the slide. And we also want to go faster, so we're adapting a diver propulsion vehicle to include the multi-camera unit as well. Speaking more broadly about assessing complex environments, there are other applications that can be used aligned with what we've done with Natural England. So for example, in city planning, when you have a complex environment, if you have a criminal or a target within there that you're trying to track, tracking them in a very complex environment is much harder than tracking them in, say, an empty field. So understanding the complexity of the environment your target is in is crucial to understanding how easy it's going to be to chase them and what resources you need to put in there. Similarly, you could apply this approach to visual data analytics. And on the right-hand side, you can just see an example graph of a complex set of data. And again, the same principle applies. If you have highly complex data, then it's hard to detect anomalous data within there. And if you had fairly simple and non-complex data, then anomalous data and outlying data would really stand out. All of these type of complex environments can be monitored over time for structural change, and that's helpful particularly in terms of the Chalk Reef project, where we can monitor erosion through the years, both from human impacts and also from geological and ecological events. Thanks for listening. The project was highly collaborative, and I express my thanks and acknowledgements to the team at Essex and also Natural England, the Eastern IFCA and CSearch, who have all contributed to this work, and also to acknowledge the funding from the ESRC Impact Acceleration grants that have allowed us to buy the equipment and do the surveying. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again soon.